John Gross.
First of all, let's go back to your basic premise that there was a pool of molten steel. I know of absolutely nobody, and no eyewitness who said so, nobody who's produced it.
You'd get down below and you'd see molten steel running down the channel rails. Like you're in a foundry.
Yeah, like lava.
Like it was
Like
lava
lava.
from a volcano.
There actually melted beams where it was molten steel that was being dug out.
Underground, it was still so hot that molten metal dripped down the sides of a wall.
And the cleanup was very difficult. The steel was coming out red in certain areas from the first couple of weeks at least.
What's the problem with this? The fires are only 1,000 to 1,200 to 1,400, and this says 1,800 degrees. But even so, steel doesn't begin to melt until 2,700 degrees or so. What can produce temperatures required to melt that steel? We'll be looking at thermite, a likely suspect which produces molten iron at 4,500 degrees. What is thermite?
An incendiary used by the military, thermite is a compound of iron oxide and aluminum, which when ignited sustains an extreme heat reaction, creating molten iron. In just 2 seconds, thermite can reach temperatures over 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit, quite enough to liquefy steel. We know that open-air fires cannot burn hot enough to melt steel, but metal had melted at the base of the towers. Appendix C of the FEMA report describes sulfur residues on the World Trade Center steel. The New York Times called this the deepest mystery of all. Sulfur slightly lowers the melting point of iron, and iron oxide and iron sulfide had formed on the surface of the structural steel. Sulfur used with thermite is called thermate, producing even faster results.
Well, this section of previously molten iron turns out to be molten iron. How do we know that? Dr. Stephen Jones, a physicist formerly from Brigham Young University, examines it, and he finds that it's not aluminum from the jet planes because it is molten iron per the electron microprobe data. He finds that it has abundant manganese, so it's not structural steel. This substance is not melted steel. It's molten iron. We don't use iron in buildings today. It's not iron from the alloy, the main ingredient of steel. It's iron, pure elemental iron. And it has other elements associated in and around it: aluminum, sulfur, potassium, manganese, and fluorine in abundance. These are associated only with thermite, or in this, the only likely suspect being thermite. Sol gel uses fluorine in very special thermite charges. This is a sol gel that can be packed into a thermite-based cutter charge designed to eject molten iron in milliseconds through the orifice of this device, cutting through structural steel, again in just milliseconds. So, do we have any evidence of thermite in the dust? Let's listen to
Dave Thomas again.
The little iron spheres that he was describing that were the size of a human hair,
Right?
those are just ordinary iron particles that can come about as the result of the fires, burning all that stuff and computers. And they can also be produced by welding and whatnot. So those, do not prove thermite.
Well, is that true? This dust is full of these previous, and this dust landed all across lower Manhattan, many, many square miles. 6% of that dust in many of the samples is composed of previously molten iron, found by USGS, documented by R.J. Lee. Typical in the dust, in fact, it's not even World Trade Center dust unless it has this previously molten iron. These samples are collected by Dr. Jones. He performs X-ray dispersive spectroscopy. What does he find? That they have these iron spheres have the same chemical makeup of the spheres produced from an ordinary thermite ignition. And what else do we find in the World Trade Center dust? We find red-gray chips, hundreds of them in each of the 4 samplings that this international team of scientists put together. Greg? Oops.
Thomas Eager.
Oh, wait, let's go to Eager first. Thomas Eager.
What's-
Whoops. There you
Paint is an excellent explanation for what you found.
go. Is this paint?
Well, it occurred to us that it might be paint, and before we published a paper claiming outrageous things, we thought we would investigate that and not just wait for a critic to say that. So in fact, we did test the paint, test it for the properties of paint in several different ways. I was expecting a different slide. We've engaged in a debate with this person who just, it's like he didn't read the paper. He just assumes it must be paint. I can't be bothered by the facts. He said that we found chromium in the samples. We found chromium in only one sample, and when we washed it in solvent, broke the chip open and tested it with the X-ray device, there was no chromium. It was clearly documented in the paper. When we heated these chips in what's called a differential scanning calorimeter, we measured how much heat we were putting into it, raised the temperature slowly, and at 430 degrees centigrade, the chips went off. They emitted a lot of heat quickly, and this doesn't happen with paint, dried paint. It just turns into ash instantly, and it doesn't release a very insignificant amount of energy. This is high-tech stuff. He ignored all the physical attributes of the material. When you zoom way in, can you go back to the superfine crystal? You see the white particles here. These are particles of iron oxide that are about 40 nanometers across. These are incredibly small, incredibly uniform in size, and intermixed with these aluminum platelets. Aluminum to be formed that way is an extremely difficult process, and to intermix these things and get them to freeze into this pattern, this is the sol gel process, which several U.S. national laboratories have been bragging to each other about their success in creating these advanced, unusual thermite-based and other metal oxide combinations that release incredible amounts of energy when the oxygen moves from one metal to another metal that it's more attracted to. These ultra-fine sized particles have a very high surface area to volume ratio, which is just like stirring something instead of just kind of leaving it one on top of the other. They're mixed together, so the reaction can proceed very fast. We also find the red layer that these are embedded in is some kind of carbon compound with oxygen and silicon, again, similar to what's described in the literature, although we were not able to analyze it far enough to get a chemical formula for it. These materials are not made in a cave in Afghanistan. And if someone wants to come back and say, well, Al-Qaeda must have stolen 100 tons of it, somebody needs to account for that. Either way, we need a new investigation. So
you want to mention the fact that these chips, when they were ignited, produced iron microspheres?
That's the other part, thank you. Originally we were motivated to look for these chips because of the iron-rich microspheres that Richard was talking about. And in fact, when we heated the material in the DSC and we looked at the remnant, it had iron spheroids attached to the chip that was not quite completely reacted. That may be the reason we found these chips, is because maybe they weren't made as perfectly as the other material in the buildings. So these are what was left that didn't go off, but we were still able to get them to go off a little bit. And we also heated another chip with a torch, and we filmed it, and it ejected a hot piece, and we tracked it down, and it was an iron spheroid. We measured it under the X-ray. Again, from start to finish, everything was confirmed that this is an extremely unusual engineered material. There's no way it could have been created by accident by airliners made of aluminum impacting steel girders, which has actually been suggested by our critics.
And paint won't produce iron microspheres when you heat it.
Thomas Eagar, upon reviewing your paper, Dr. Stephen Jones' paper, I note the following. 2, the presence of iron oxide, zinc, chromium, as well as 3, the statistical probability of finding these samples all suggest that paint is an excellent explanation for what you found. But you and your co-authors ignore all these facts.
Well, this is the slide I was looking for. It's actually Dr. Eager who's ignoring the facts. He didn't, I don't know how he could have read our paper and written that back to us. By statistical probability, I already talked about the chromium. Zinc also was not found in any of the chips after we washed them, and it was only found on one of them before we washed them. The statistical probability, what he's talking about is he said that we only found one chip in each of our 4 samples. And wouldn't it be strange if you took a little dust here and a little dust there and there was only one chip? There were 62 red chips in one sample amounting to 1.5 grams. There was, you know, some number in another. It's all on the paper. It's just, if you don't want to see it, you're not going to see it.
Experts who are structural engineers cite Bill Rice, the prevailing theory would have us believe that each of the twin towers inexplicably collapsed upon itself, crushing all 287 massive columns on each floor while maintaining a near free fall acceleration.
Matthew Levy. Ronald Hamburger. It appeared to me that charges had been placed in the building. Upon learning that no bombs had been detonated, I was very surprised.
It's interesting when our detractors actually agree with us, but then something happens to them early on. They see, Ronald Hamburger says, it appeared to me that explosives were placed in the building. And Van Romero, who said, in my opinion, it looked like a series of explosions. Later on, something happens. They change their mind. It's really, really quite an interesting phenomenon. Well, all of this evidence appears to be direct evidence of explosive destruction. None of it can be explained by fire. And with the corroborating evidence, we'd like to ask you once more, how many of you believe that the Twin Towers were brought down by fires and jet plane impacts, according to the official story?
How many believe, number one, that it was brought down by the jet planes and fire? Raise your hand.
And how many are unsure?
I think the one person left.
How many are
unsure? Okay. How many of you think that there's some validity to what's been exposed today?
And some of
If
you
you're
aren't,
participating, that would be everyone. Thank you.
Okay.
I don't know the motivations for individuals who do this sort of thing. I do know, however, that they never have an engineering basis for their conclusions.
Well, bless him.
We've gone through the basis for our conclusions, and we had to keep things very rapid paced. There's an enormous amount of evidence that you can follow to its end, and we hope that you will take the time to do that. And look at our website and get our video. You can watch our videos for free on our website if you can't afford it. We make this information available free of charge, and we have. Can you show the paper?
Right. I'd like to, as we close...
We have a paper we did that's, I believe, 16 or 17 pages long, where one of our supporters called these petition signers of ours who are specifically structural engineers and talked to them and got quotes from them. 29 of them seem to think that we have an engineering basis for our conclusions.
One of them sitting right here, is he?
Okay.
I believe so. Thank you.